So as Riley mentioned, I'm here on behalf of the Nevada Council on Problem Gambling. And so this is a very brief commercial up front. Our mission is basically to generate awareness, promote education, and advocate for quality treatment of problem gambling in the state of Nevada. And we do that by working with all stakeholders that will work with us on this issue. We've been around 37 years. We're an affiliate of the National Council on Problem Gambling. And what that means in a nutshell is that we take no position for or against legalized gambling. So please don't hear this as an anti-gambling talk. It is not that at all. We just recognize that for a small percentage of people, it can become a true addiction, just like substances can become an addiction. And we want to be a resource, as does the National Council, for individuals and their family members. So for those of us that are joining, for those of you who are joining us from outside of Nevada, this is a map from the National Council on Problem Gambling that shows all of their state affiliates. All of the states that are in light blue have a state affiliate. So they have an official council associated with the National Council that you can reach out to for help. But even those states that are in dark blue, which do not have a council affiliate, and I believe there are some folks joining us both from Hawaii and West Virginia today, those states do not have an affiliate council, but you can still use the 800 number here on the screen to call, and that's a national helpline. That's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, completely confidential, and they will connect you to your most local resources, whether it's a treatment, 12-step meetings, what have you, and can also listen with compassion and empathy to your particular situation. So if you ever just need to talk with someone about this issue, whether it's for yourself or somebody in your life that you care about dearly, please use that number, and you will see that several times during this presentation. So we can't start talking about problem gambling without first defining what is gambling to begin with. So there are three kind of key elements when we talk about gambling, and those are a consideration or wager, something you're risking, plus a prize, the thing that you hope to win, and also a chance or the uncertainty of winning that prize. So a good definition of gambling, or one that I like, is when you wager something of value to win something of value where the outcome is uncertain, whether that outcome is based on chance, skill, or a combination of the two constitutes gambling. So it might not even be money that you're wagering. It could be something else of value to you, but that definition constitutes gambling. And so with that in mind, I'll just ask you to think in your own head about, which of these are gambling? Slot machines, blackjack, bingo, horse racing, sports betting, lottery, raffle, poker. And the truth is, all of the above are gambling if there's a wager involved. Even raffles, of course, which may be to support causes that are near and dear to your heart. You're putting down some money for the chance of winning an item, so that technically fits the definition of gambling as well. So a few facts about gambling. Some form of gambling is legal in 48 of the 50 states. Utah and Hawaii are the only two states in the country where gambling is entirely illegal. There is some form of gambling that is legal in all 48 other states, whether that's casino gambling, might be bingo, might be poker rooms, it might be scratch off, it might be lottery, but something is legal. And about 85% of people in the US report having gambled at least once in their lifetimes, and about 2/3 report having gambled in the past year. So the majority of us in this country gamble at least once a year on something, and the great majority of those of us who choose to gamble for fun and entertainment. They set limits and they stick to that plan. They gamble at times that it's appropriate for them to. They're not impacting other planned activities or people in their lives, and they're experiencing no lasting harmful effects from their gambling. Now, nobody likes to lose. We all hope to win, but it's not producing any long-lasting harmful effects. And so the majority of us that choose to gamble can do so responsibly just for entertainment. In Nevada, up to 6% of our adults may have a gambling problem. So if you think about it, that's 1 out of every 16 people or so that you bump into on a daily basis here in Nevada are struggling, often in silence, with a gambling problem of some kind. Here you notice the 800 number again. This is also our website, and we'd encourage you to visit whenthefunstops.org, which is the council's website. Whether you're here in Nevada or elsewhere, we invite you to look up our resources and take advantage of them. So a little bit about problems and impact. As I mentioned, here in Nevada, we have one of the highest rates of adult problem gambling in the United States, about 6% of our population, based on the one and only prevalent study, which is about 20 years old. So we're way overdue to conduct another one. Most states, it hovers between 1% and 2%. Some states a little less than 1%, some states a little more than 2%, but for the most part, it's between 1% and 2% of adults that are struggling with the problem. Here's another problem about people who are suffering from a gambling disorder, as it's clinically called. Only about 10% will actually seek out help for that problem. There's a tremendous amount of stigma, a tremendous amount of guilt and shame associated with this particular addictive disorder. And so people who are in the grips of it are often very confused. They're embarrassed because they've often gambled responsibly all their lives without any problem, and then gradually, and then maybe more quickly, it's become a problem. And so it's got very low treatment seeking because of that stigma. Important to know also that about 10 to 15% of individuals with a substance use disorder, so that could be an alcohol use or some other type of drug use disorder, also suffer from a gambling disorder if they are screened for it. The numbers are quite a bit higher coming the other direction. That is to say, if you're diagnosed with having a gambling disorder, somewhere between 40 and 70%, depending on the study you look at, of those people will also suffer from a co-occurring substance use disorder at the same time. So very common to see those two go hand in hand. And to just drive home the serious nature of this illness, as many as 20% of problem gamblers contemplate or attempt suicide at some point when they are in the grips of their illness, compared to only about 5% of the general population who ever even contemplate it. So very serious. You should treat it just as seriously as you would a substance addiction, whether it's with yourself or someone you care about. So now let's talk a little bit about exactly what problem gambling is. And so it's very easy to think of problem gambling simply as gambling behavior that disrupts the gambler's personal or professional life. So that's often exhibited by a loss of control, that is, an inability to set either limits of money or amount of time spent on gambling, and also emotional and or financial consequences that are a result of that gambling. And in spite of becoming aware of those as they're happening, the person still feels that they're unable to stop. And really, for those individuals who are suffering from this illness, even though they are thinking about it all the time, they go out and do it, they're impacting other areas of their lives negatively, it stops being fun. And that sounds counterintuitive. It's like, if it's not fun, why are they still gambling, right? And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. These are the formal criteria that psychologists who are trained in this to treat this disorder use to diagnose a gambling disorder. This is a recognized clinical addictive disorder in what's called the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that's used to diagnose mental health disorders. So first, needing to gamble with increasing amounts of money over time, being restless or irritable when cutting down or trying to stop, repeated unsuccessful attempts to control or stop it. And you'll notice you could probably insert substances into these statements and they would make a lot of sense too. Being preoccupied with gambling, even when you're not doing it. Gambling while feeling or when feeling distress. In other words, using gambling as a mood regulator to escape from those feelings. chasing losses. This is something that's very specific to problem gamblers. People who gamble recreationally, each event is a separate event. It's disposable income. They've saved up that money. They go out, they have fun, they're hoping to win. But if they lose, they're not going back to the ATM again and again and again, trying to win back the money that they've lost either earlier in that day or possibly yesterday or last week, last month. And people with a gambling problem are often obsessed with what they've lost and trying to win that back. Number 7, lying to conceal the extent of involvement in gambling. 8, jeopardizing significant relationships. So these could be personal relationships with family or friends, or they could be job or career related relationships. And then finally, relying on others to provide financial relief. And if you basically answer positively to at least 4 of these, then that's enough to be officially diagnosed with this disorder. But even an answer of yes to 1 or 2 of these is a good time for a conversation, right? Or a brief intervention or some self-reflection about this issue. You can ask yourself these questions just as easily as you might ask somebody else that you're concerned about. So potential consequences of gambling. Of course, the first thing that jumps into most of our minds when we think of somebody with a gambling problem is the financial issue. And often that is the first visible sign that becomes known that there's a problem present. So certainly problem gambling can cause financial issues, but there are often a lot of other factors that really are sometimes precursors and that get exacerbated by further gambling. These can be emotional, personal, like neglect, self-neglect, lying, arguments, becoming abusive. Problem gamblers often deflect anger onto someone close to them. They often find ways to blame others in their lives for why they are engaging in this activity. So if you're in a situation where this is happening, rest assured this is not about you. This is where that person is in their own life at this moment, and they are struggling. I promise you that they're beating themselves up. They're probably ashamed, feeling very guilty, but often that comes out in anger that's deflected towards others. Employment issues are very common. Legal issues, bad checks, embezzlement, robbery, insurance fraud. These are not unusual with problem gambling. So I think one of the best ways to get a sense of how serious this illness can be is to hear it in the words of people who have lived this experience. And one of the things, I apologize, I very incompletely introduced myself at the beginning of this presentation. So let me do a little bit of that before we go into a video I'm going to show. Again, for those of you that have just joined recently, my name is Ted Harwell. I'm here on behalf of the Nevada Council on Problem Gambling. My principal profession, I'm actually a research scientist at the Desert Research Institute in Las Vegas, which is part of the Nevada system of higher education, a background originally in archaeology, which transitions to a background in radiation monitoring and health effects and the history of nuclear weapons detonation here in Nevada. By night, I am a professional cellist with the Las Vegas Philharmonic. I've been a soccer coach, a volleyball coach here in town, but none of these things kept me from developing a pretty serious gambling disorder myself that reached its head about 14 years ago, about 13 and a half years ago. And as I got into recovery from that illness myself, I became very interested in the idea of public education, bringing awareness to this issue, being very visible as just who I am in the community, talking about this issue to help reduce the stigma. And while it reached a head in my early 40s, I've certainly come to the point where I'm eligible now for a lot of those AARP discounts myself, and I'm grateful for those. And so just because it hasn't been a problem earlier in your life doesn't mean it can't become one later on. And I'll talk about some of the risk factors, and we'll hear some things shortly. But let me get out of this screen briefly and over to another one. This video is about 15 minutes long. The people in it are not actors. This is not scripted. They are giving their own stories. The woman who introduces the topic at the beginning is Denise Quirk, who is the executive director of the Reno Problem Gambling Center here in Nevada. This was filmed about 15 years ago, but everything is still very relevant today. So let's get started here. I'm sorry, I have to get out of the share to make sure the sound will work. I forgot about that aspect. Give this one more try here. Share sound. Okay, we've got it going. Excellent.
Problem gambling occurs when gambling that used to be a form of recreation, a pastime, or just something fun to do with friends becomes a problem. It can be a problem in many ways: emotional, financial, relationship, work, or time management issues. Most people who seek treatment tell us they are not sure why they can't control their gambling. They're not sure why when they try to cut down or stop, they are unable to, and it leaves them fearful. Problem gambling is different for senior members of the community in several ways. Seniors begin to gamble for different reasons than the rest of the population, and they have special factors which can put them at risk for developing problem gambling. Seniors have a need and a desire for social interaction. Many seniors are retired and have more time on their hands. Seniors also gamble to relieve boredom, loneliness, and isolation. Sometimes seniors gamble to get away from the problems and concerns they may be experiencing in their lives, such as illness, loss of a loved one, and grief. Some seniors may have physical or mental illness or a cognitive impairment that put them at risk of developing problem gambling. Older adults may not know that addiction is an illness and may not understand why they or their loved one are compelled to gamble or why it has become a problem. They are also very self-reliant and therefore less likely to seek help or know where to seek help. Seniors are highly impacted by problem gambling because they have less time, energy, and opportunity to recoup their financial, employment, and relationship losses than younger adults. The full cycle of problem gambling and recovery follows a distinct pattern that was identified by the late Dr. Robert Custer. During the winning phase, the gambler experiences big wins and starts to gamble more frequently and increase the amount of their bets.
I hit a royal flush one time playing a video poker machine, and I thought, boy, how great this was to win this much money with very little invested. And I thought I would be able to do this all the time.
I used to raise the ante a little bit more and bet a little bit more to make myself feel I was winning. If I won $50 or $100, it was pretty good when I first started.
Gambling to me was an excitement. It was something that interested me. It was a challenge. Every time I placed a bet or played with different cards or people, that I had the challenge to beat them, like in a sports complex, that you want to win the game. I didn't want to lose. I wanted to win constantly.
In the beginning, we would go out and gamble by playing the penny slot machines. It was more or less something social to do, entertainment.
Well, most of the time when I was gambling before it became a problem, I was always happy.
During the losing phase, gamblers begin borrowing money to gamble with, and their mood and personality begins to change, usually showing more irritability, restlessness, or withdrawing.
And I say, I'm only going to bet so much today, and if I lose this money, I'll quit. And the only thing it did, it got me to walk a lot, because as soon as I lost whatever I'd taken in, I'd walk back to the car and get some more. And eventually I'd go back to the car and take everything out that I had in the car.
Started now using credit cards in my own name. My wife and I had excellent credit. So to keep her from finding out what I was doing, I would go ahead and run up credit cards. But I was winning enough to be able to pay the credit card bills when they came in monthly. But then it got out of control to where I wasn't winning. I needed to use another credit card and then another credit card just to pay off the one previously, and it just got into a vicious circle.
And then he would change his story, and we would argue and fight, and then he would leave.
I think the most hopeless time I felt after gambling is when I lost the Christmas fund I was talking about earlier. It got to the point when I come home, what I was going to tell the wife, that I had lost all this money.
As the downward spiral of problem gambling continues, the desperation phase is marked by a dangerous time during which a problem gambler is no longer enjoying their gambling. They have a great deal of remorse about their actions, but they're unable to stop gambling on their own.
I felt it was hitting the bottom of the barrel, scratching everything I can get to get the money to gamble some more, because I want to continue gambling.
I used to take some time off work to go gambling and hide the fact that I was going to go gambling, because it was real tough. They would, I could get fired for it, but I never let on where I was going. I was always trying to cover my tracks.
Hitting bottom for problem gamblers may include feelings of hopelessness, increased problems with alcohol or other drugs, arrest, divorce, and finally thoughts or even attempts at suicide. Emotional breakdowns and withdrawal symptoms often occur.
I was trying to avoid lying to anybody, but when it came to my gambling and what I did, if I won or if I lost, I was lying all the time.
As the time went on, I got angrier and angrier and angrier till it became rage. And I would rage at him. And I would do it in front of the children. And it was very wrong of me to do that in front of the children.
We had a very serious argument, verbally, not physically, but it was to the point I figured, oh, all right, I'll take care of that. So I went out into my shop and decided that I will hang myself. I figured the shooting wouldn't work because it would have her pick up everything. So I got a rope and tied it with a noose like a Western nut, threw the rope over the rafter, and I felt low at that time. I figured I'd better ask my God and my understanding to forgive me what I was about to do. And I think that was the lowest, trying to attempt suicide.
Once a problem gambler has reached the bottom, professionals and family members may reach out with an intervention or whatever means available in the next critical phase. And this is when problem gamblers and their families come to realize that there is hope for them and that something can be done to treat their illness.
After that confrontation on that Sunday afternoon, we didn't speak the rest of the day. And in the morning, she left for work, and I was retired. And after I got up in the morning, I went into the restroom, and on the mirror, she had placed a phone number and a little note saying that she thought it was time that I addressed my gambling problem and to seek help. And there was a phone number there, and for me to call that phone number.
were the ones I was really making it so unbearable for them they didn't want to be around me anymore. Like some of the people I worked with, and some of the friends at church, because I was capable of lying to any of them. And finally it took the turn that I just had to do something different.
And she pointed out the ways I could get help to go into Gamblers Anonymous meetings and reaching out to say that I was a compulsive gambler. That was a big thing, admitting to myself that I had a problem. I didn't think I had a problem. I thought I could control it by myself.
When I went into recovery, the counselor at the treatment center my husband was in told me I was doing all the wrong things for all the right reasons. And that she pointed out a lot of the things that I was doing that were very detrimental to our relationship and to both of our recoveries. And she directed me towards some 12-step programs, and I started going to them. And there I was able to talk about what was going on.
Originally, I thought that I was the only person in the whole United States that was a compulsive gambler and did things the way I did.
During the rebuilding phase, gamblers begin to see that not only is there help and hope, but they have more quality family time, less impatience, and their moods begin to improve.
First thing that the program did for me was to make me be honest.
After I started getting clarity back in my life, in my mind, I could see that these programs were going to work for me and that I needed to embrace and accept them as help.
Boy, recovery is something great. Since I've been in recovery, for example, my wife and I have gone closer together. We've established a relationship that, like in the beginning, it's like a new honeymoon.
Today I have tools for living, and I'm living my life today to the fullest, and I'm enjoying life.
For recovering problem gamblers, the growth phase represents a whole new way of life that is 180 degrees from what they used to have. Treatment providers tell problem gamblers that once a person has accepted that they are a pathological gambler, they cannot go backward, but can only move forward in recovery. Essentially, for the rest of their lives, they will be in the growth phase.
Take the book that we have and read it thoroughly and follow the rules and regulations on it, because it's the only thing that can get us to think the way we're supposed to be thinking. Because when we're gambling, our thinking is really screwed up.
It's very important that everybody has support, because without that support, you're alone and you just can't make it on your own. You have to have somebody to help you in the times when you're feeling down or you're feeling like you can't make it.
I can only say that the two programs that I attend, the Problem Gambling Center and GA, have saved my life. And when there wasn't hope, I found hope through the members that I've met, the support that I get. I have a sponsor in these programs. I have mentors. I have people that have walked this path long before I have, and they are sharing their knowledge and wisdom with me.
I have my family back again. I have people I can talk to in recovery, and it just seems to be a better life.
If you believe that you or a senior friend or family member may have a gambling problem, it is very important to seek help early in the cycle by calling the Problem Gamblers Helpline listed here, or by accessing the resources listed in the booklet that accompanies this film. For anyone exhibiting the warning signs of problem gambling, there is hope and there is help through treatment.
There's that number again. Come out of here and back into my presentation. All right, so a lot of thought-provoking information there. And let's talk a little bit, Denise mentioned in the film why seniors are at risk of developing a gambling disorder. And a lot of these will sound very familiar. Generally have more free time, often in retirement, might have more issues with boredom, loneliness, isolation, and depression are
Ted,
more of an issue. Yes.
I'm so sorry. We're not seeing your presentation.
Forgive me. Let me try this again.
I just watched the whole thing. Oh, yeah, that one. Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Okay.
There we go.
Can you
Perfect.
see it
Thank
now?
you. Yes.
Sorry about that.
No problem. Thank you.
So I went through some of these risk factors, which are risk factors, quite frankly, for any addictive disorder. Also, cognitive impairment, as you heard Denise mention, can be an issue. And there are also some medications everyone should be aware of that can trigger gambling disorder or compulsive behaviors, especially what are called dopamine agonists, which may be used to treat Parkinson's, for example, or restless leg syndrome. Some mood stabilizers like Abilify have been shown in some cases to initiate some gambling problems. So be aware of those, particularly if there's any family history of addictive disorders. And you'll notice these top four, where is it? May sound more familiar. I mean, what's been going on this past year that has given a lot of us more free time? Boredom, loneliness, isolation, depression, loss, or grief. Right, I mean, the pandemic. If there's anybody listening to this presentation who hasn't experienced at least some of these over the past years, I want to meet you because you must be just amazing. But these, again, are all risk factors for any addictive disorders, including problem gambling. And the pandemic has brought all of these to us in great amounts. And those of us who are seniors, of course, are more affected than others by the pandemic because we are more at risk, obviously, of adverse effects if we contract it. And so in general, we have to be more careful than younger parts of the population, which make us more disconnection. And of course, being more susceptible to adverse effects, hospitalization and death from coronavirus. I know several people personally who lost their lives as a result of this illness. I assume many of you probably do too. And that loss or grief can be a tremendous trigger for escaping in various ways. Seniors also have some more challenges. Gambling may be a big part of social activity. We have a pretty large retirement community here in Las Vegas, and most of that retirement community has come from outside the state. They remembered the time that they came to Vegas while they were married and working for entertainment. They had a great time, and in their retirement said, hey, let's move to Vegas. We always have such a fun time there. And they come and they don't have any social network. They really don't know any people. What did they do when they came for entertainment? They gambled. And so that becomes, a primary social activity and is with much more frequency than it ever has before. And that could transition into a problem. They may fear greater isolation or loss if asked to limit or stop it. Autonomy for us is important, right? This self-direction and independence can be very, very important. We don't want our adult children controlling our activities or having a big say. We're often on a fixed income. And so if we do experience serious financial repercussions from our gambling, we're less likely to be able to recoup that when it happens. So here are some signs of problem gambling in older adults. And these, again, are just fairly generic. You'll notice they could be indicative of other problems unrelated to gambling, but things to watch out for. So a loss of interest in normal activities with friends and family, blocks of time that are unaccounted for, high priority giving to gambling and gambling related activities, changes in attitude or personality. You're noticing something's wrong, you can't quite figure it out. Maybe you tie it to that increased gambling activity and something's going on behind the scenes. A sudden need for money and loans, missing possessions or assets, that jewelry that goes missing, or that family heirloom of some kind that disappears, or maybe disappears and is found and then disappears again. Pawning of items is not unusual. Neglect of personal needs like food, utilities, and medical responsibilities. Secrecy and avoidance of or anger when questioned about time and money. Those of us who developed a gambling problem can get very, very defensive, especially when we're not yet ready to admit to ourselves that we have a problem. Again, we can deflect that anger and blame very, very well. General decline in physical health and emotional withdrawal and depression. Again, suicidality is very, very high with problem gambling. I wanted to include a few kind of myths, common myths and facts about problem gambling. One is that problem gamblers gamble every day. And in fact, problem gamblers may gamble seldom or often, but if when they do gamble, it's causing significant problems in any area of their life, then it's a problem. It doesn't matter how frequent it is. And you're going to get copies of all of these resources and lists emailed to you following, so I don't need to take notes here. Problem gamblers participate in any form of gambling anytime they get the chance. And in fact, most people with a gambling problem favor one form of gambling that causes their problems, although they may engage in other types of gambling on the side as well. Another myth: if a gambler can afford it, gambling is not a problem. And that's not necessarily true. They may well be able to afford the limits that they're gambling within, but again, if that gambling activity is taken away from other social events and contacts, the time they're spending with family members, and that's causing those relationships to be strained or disintegrate, then the gambling is an issue. Another myth: problem gamblers are just irresponsible. And in fact, while those of us who have a gambling problem definitely engage in behaviors which look like irresponsibility and are irresponsible, problem gambling is actually an illness that can be treated. It's not that we're not aware of our irresponsibility or moral failings, but this is not an illness of morality, even though our moral compass does go absolutely haywire when we're in the grips of it. Another one I alluded to earlier, that partners can cause problem gamblers to gamble. No, if you're in a relationship with someone who has an issue and they are blaming you for their gambling problem, nope, that's all about them and nothing about you. Again, deflection. Problem gamblers' relationships usually break down because of financial issues. In fact, partners of problem gamblers usually report that it's the lying and the breaking of the trust that destroy the relationship more often than financial issues. And this is one of the diagnostic criteria, right, for problem gambling. The gambler, when they are in denial about their issue, will often lie to cover up the extent to which they're gambling. Another myth: it's important to get a problem gambler out of debt as soon as possible. Some people think if you just remove all of those consequences from their lives, it gives them a fresh start and now they can start over. But in fact, generally speaking, bailing out problem gamblers only enables them to continue gambling and avoid seeking help. So as part of the recovery process from this illness, very important that people with the gambling problem take care of their debts on their own at the speed that they're able to, because that serves as a reminder, that consequence that is there of how they got into that problem in the first place. Another myth, that it's easy to spot problem gambling. In fact, problem gambling is known as the hidden addiction, precisely because it is often so very difficult to know that it is present. It has few obvious symptoms. It doesn't have the physical symptoms that often become present with an alcohol or drug addiction, for example, although personal medical neglect can lead to that declining physical health because people are not taking their medicine, or they're spending money that they should use on medical needs for the gambling, because they feel in that moment when they're in the process of gambling, they feel often relief from those emotional or medical issues in their lives. So what if it's not a problem? A lot of you may be saying, well, I like to gamble, but I don't think it's a problem. Maybe sometimes I spend a little bit too much, but how do I keep it that way if it's not a problem? Or if I'm concerned that somebody's starting to get a little bit out of control, what are some suggestions I might be able to give them? So number one, if you choose to gamble, do so for entertainment only. If you're no longer really having fun, if gambling is no longer an enjoyable activity, ask yourself, why are you still playing? Treat the money you lose as the cost of your entertainment, just as you would a movie or a concert or a trip that you have saved money to go and do. Of course, you hope to have that big win and do lots of fun stuff with that, but you should expect to lose. Set a dollar limit and stick to it. Decide what you can afford to spend, and don't change your mind while you're playing or after you're playing to try and win that back. Set a time limit. So not only a money limit, but a time limit, and stick to it. Decide how long you're going to gamble and leave when that time is up, even if you are winning or if you are losing. I mentioned this already, expect to lose. The odds are not in your favor. That's how they build those beautiful casinos. Make it a personal rule not to gamble on credit. If you're gambling on credit, if you're taking out loans from your credit cards, you are borrowing money to finance your gambling, or borrowing money from your cards to pay back debts that you'd otherwise be able to pay if you weren't gambling. So don't ever gamble with borrowed money or money you can't afford to lose. Maintain balance in your life. So the gambling activity shouldn't be interfering with your other social activities with friends, family, or your work life. Mentioned this already, but avoid chasing that lost money. Don't obsess about what's happened to this point. Chalk it up to the normal gambling experience and move on, and don't come back till you can afford to do it. Don't gamble as a way to cope with emotional or physical pain. This is very, very common, much more common than you would think. I've heard some people say that gambling was the only activity that took them out of some physical ailment that they took of. When they were in the act of gambling, they literally did not feel that pain, and it was better than any drug they got. That's how powerful our brains can be in producing their own chemicals and opiates. Our brains actually produce opiates. That's why we have opiate receptors in the brain. But all of these neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin and norepinephrine and epinephrine that our brain produces in response to some of these behaviors, for those people who are at risk for developing a gambling problem or any other addictive disorder, these are things that are implicated. And finally, learn about the warning signs of problem gambling. That is what you are doing today. So congratulations. Thank you for being here. I want to mention some solutions and resources that are available. There is professional treatment available for problem gambling. Again, there's both individual and group therapy available in pretty much every state, even in states where they don't have legal gambling. Trained problem gambling counselors are your best resource. If you're looking for somebody, you should always ask if they're trained specifically to provide treatment for gambling, because while there is a great deal of overlap between the substance addictions and the behavioral addictions, there are some important differences that do require that extra level of training to treat effectively. There's also recovery support that you can engage in, such as Gamblers Anonymous, 12-step meeting that's just like AA or NA, for example. Gam-Anon, which is for the family and friends of somebody who's gambling, to get support from family members who have gone through the same thing that you have, experiencing somebody else's gambling that's impacting your life. Other group programs, faith-based support groups are out. These are all essentially free resources to take advantage of in all places where they occur. And sometimes it's the only thing that that person needs. Some people do perfectly fine with a 12-step meeting. They don't need any a formal professional therapy. Even there's a third of people who actually find a way to stop on their own, believe it or not. I didn't believe it when I first heard that, because that definitely wasn't me. I tried to stop countless times on my own in many different ways and was never successful, but some people find a way to do that. But for about 2/3 of us, we need some extra help. Here in Nevada, we have 3 outpatient clinics in Southern Nevada, 1 outpatient and residential treatment facility in Northern Nevada, and also an outpatient and residential treatment facility in rural Nevada. And here in Nevada, we are very fortunate that through our State Problem Gambling Fund, all treatment resources for people with gambling problems are provided free of charge, whether that's one-on-one treatment or an intensive outpatient program or residential treatment. There is a place for you, and not only you, but also friends and loved ones. If you are someone who is impacted by somebody else's gambling problem and you are a resident of Nevada, you can get free counseling and treatment on how to protect yourself, both financially and emotionally, from that other person's activities, regardless of whether they're ready to stop themselves. If both people get into that recovery process at the same time, of course, that's the most benefit for everybody involved, but that doesn't always happen. Our VA hospital also opened a gambling treatment center here in Las Vegas at the end of 2019. It's just the second one in the country. The other one is just outside of Cleveland, but we're very proud of that. Certainly gambling issues among our military service members and our veterans is a significant issue, and we need to have resources for them. Those of us who are seniors, we may be very hyper resistant to the idea of being totally abstinent from gambling. In fact, a lot of problem gamblers feel that way. They can't imagine not ever gambling. So there may be a pathway to controlled gambling. Certainly there are many treatment providers who are providing the opportunity to experiment with harm reduction. Can we get back to that stage of controlled gambling that was once present? And it may be during that process they discover, wow, I really can't. I've tried all of these suggestions, help me learn how to work on an abstinence only model, or they may be successful. So just a few takeaway messages. While it's important to be sensitive to the unique needs of those of us who are seniors, it's also very important to recognize that gambling disorder can have very, very serious negative consequences in that person's life. So you need to find some balance in talking about the issue. We're often resistant to change of any kind and very protective of our independence. When possible, alternatives to total abstinence may be a solution. When alternatives are not working, there is emotional and therapeutic help that are very essential, that come in very many forms and can literally be life-saving. And finally, gambling disorder is a real illness. It's been recognized for quite a long time under many different names. Most recently since 2013 as gambling disorder, and it occurs side by side with the substance use disorders because it is scientifically recognized now as a true addictive disorder. You can look at functional MRI scans of the brain of people who have alcohol use disorder and a drug use disorder and a gambling disorder and put them side by side of people engaged in those activities, and they're literally almost indistinguishable from one another, despite the fact with gambling you're not putting something physically into your body. So the scientific evidence is very very good. But also, very important, it is serious and potentially deadly, but it's very treatable, and treatment is very successful for those who are willing to engage in it. And with that, that's kind of the end of the formal presentation. This is all of our resources for the Nevada Council, from our email to our phone number to our website. I also put the Problem Gamblers Helpline again on this slide. We are on Twitter, we are on Facebook, we have a YouTube site that is great, that has lots of short videos on different aspects of this disorder. I would encourage you to watch. And I'm going to finish out with just a 5 to 10 minute overview of my personal story, and allow you to ask questions about that too. So here's the gambling imagery, the one and only study. I am the one in the middle, by the way, in case there was any doubt here at the poker table. But I'm going to stop sharing the screen for the moment, and again, just share a very brief overview of my own personal story, and share some of the risk factors that went into my story. I started gambling very young. Today, we know that early exposure as a child and frequency of exposure as a child are both risk factors for developing a gambling problem later on in life. So I was gambling by at least the age of 10. A lot of our family trips used to be driving from Lubbock, Texas to Ruidoso, New Mexico, where there's a horse race track, and we would camp in the mountains outside of town, which was great fun as a kid. But during the day, we'd spend the whole day at the racetrack, and my dad would give each of the kids $20, and that was ours to gamble on the horses. So while he was the one making the bets at the window, obviously, the kids were in action from a very young age. I learned how to read the history of the horses, how to bet on the horses. So as you're thinking of your own life, I'm sure a lot of you have kids, maybe who are still minors. Some of you have grandkids, I'm sure. Don't ever buy them lottery tickets or scratch offs, for example, as stocking stuffers. Try to limit their exposure, at least as much as you have control of it, to gambling activities, to the absolute minimum, until they are actually an adult. That can play a factor. Family history is an issue. So addictive disorders in my family go back at least 3 generations. My father definitely had a gambling problem, although it was his nicotine use disorder that ultimately ended his life a couple years ago. His father had an alcohol problem. His father before him, my great-grandfather, may have had an addictive disorder. I've read letters that are now over 130 years old that he wrote home to his mother as a young man, and every single one of them asks for money for a different reason. And while that is not proof by any stretch of the imagination, a lot of the way it's phrased reminded me of myself when I was in that cycle. I could get money out of you in some pretty creative ways. Whether you were a family member or my best friend or a coworker, I could come up with some pretty creative excuses as to why I needed the money. Fast forward to my teenage years, my dad taught me how to play poker, and by the time I was in high school, I was playing poker in a regular weekly game in Lubbock, Texas, with my own father. So it was also a bonding exercise with him, right? Very important as a young man. And also I was playing with these men. I was by far the youngest person playing in this group. And that transitioned, even though that was a very low stakes game and very friendly, that transitioned into a high stakes game by the time I was going to college at Texas Tech in Lubbock. And that was a pot limit game, which meant individual hands might get up into the hundreds of dollars. And at that time, I still had control of my gambling. And all I mean when I say that is I took what I could afford to lose to the game, and if I lost that, I stopped until I had enough to play with. So I was very disciplined at that time, and I also won a lot of money in that game over time, not because I was a great poker player, but because there was at least one and probably 2 men in that game who had already developed a pretty serious gambling problem. And the way that manifested in the live poker game was they would stay in virtually every hand, almost to the last card every time, trying to cast their miracle card. And even if they caught their miracle card, sometimes it wasn't the best hand at the game. And I was happy to take their money, and I suspect everybody else in the game was too. So it gave me a little bit of an overinflated sense of my own skill in the game at that point. I finished graduate school at Texas Tech a little over 30 years ago, and one of the job offers I got was here in Las Vegas, and I was pretty excited about that. And I moved to Las Vegas, and I was excited for a couple of reasons. Not only because I got a job in archaeology, and the big joke in my family had been if it doesn't work out for you as an archaeologist, you've got your music to fall back on. And both those things worked out pretty well for me. I got my job with the Desert Research Institute, a very prestigious internationally known institute. And also when the Las Vegas Philharmonic formed in 1999, I've been playing with them every year since its first full season. Get to play with lots of personalities that come through the strip and need to hire an orchestra. But my big fantasy was about entering the World Series of Poker. And so my big fantasy was I'm going to save up $10,000, which is the entry fee. It was back then and still is today, although thousands more people enter it today than ever did back then. I'm going to enter that World Series of Poker and finish up at that last table with the big names and win hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. And that was an obsession for a while. But the day would come in the early 2000s when I would recognize that I had lost enough money playing video poker, which became my primary gambling addiction, if you will, to have entered the big game at the World Series of Poker every single year since I've lived in Vegas, and yet I never had. And so that was a little bit of an aha moment and a little bit of the perverse nature of any type of addictive disorder. There's a lot of distorted and irrational thinking that goes on while you are in service to any kind of addictive disorder. Some other things happened along the way because this didn't become a problem overnight for me. One of the things that happened was that I developed a voice disorder after living in Las Vegas for about 5 years. And for about a year, it was very difficult for me to lecture or to sing. I'd also been singing semi-professionally with a group, and all of a sudden I couldn't do that. And until that issue was properly diagnosed and I began treatment the better part of a year later, it was an incredible trauma to me in my life. We know today that a trauma in life, for example, the loss of a loved one in a relationship, the loss of financial security, the loss of a loved one, for instance, during the pandemic, all of these things can sometimes initiate an addictive disorder where there wasn't one present before. So people start to use gambling or a substance like alcohol or a drug to, again, numb out from the pain that trauma has caused them. Also, the more trauma you experienced as a child, whether it was physical, sexual, emotional, the greater your chances of developing an addictive disorder later in life. That includes gambling. That was true of me as well. I witnessed a lot of emotional abuse as a child between my parents as well as between step parents later on in my life. Another thing that can initiate is, we talked about that winning phase, or Denise did in the video, that having that big win or a series of wins in a short amount of time can alter the way somebody thinks about their gambling behavior. I had that happen. It was years before I hit my first royal flush after moving to Las Vegas, because I rarely played the video poker machines. I thought, well, that's a sucker's bet. Why do people play the machines? You're never going to beat the computer chip over the long run. At least if I'm playing with real people, I might have an advantage over them in experience and learn to read their behavior. But sometimes out of boredom, there's another risk factor. I would plop down in the seat and put money in while I was waiting for a seat to open up at the live poker table. And eventually video poker became my go-to game, particularly after I hit my first jackpot and hit another one in a short amount of time, even though it made no rational sense to me at the time. And so all of these things came together in my life. And by the early 2000s and the last 2 years of my gambling disorder, say 2006 and 2007, my daily life had become going to work, getting the minimum amount of work that I needed to get done, delegating a lot of my tasks to other employees, and then taking off for a long lunch, sometimes taking off at lunch and not coming back for the rest of the day, sometimes calling in sick to work and saying, sorry, I'm sick. As far as my wife knew, I was at work. As far as work knew, I was homesick, but I was really at the casino desperately trying to win back the money that was now tied up in hidden credit cards and hidden payday loans. If you looked at our checking and savings and retirement, you'd have no idea there was a serious issue going on. We talked about how hidden this can be. People notice changes in my behavior for sure, But because I was mostly gambling on work time, I was able to hide it from my family pretty successfully for a long time. So by the time I came clean to my wife a couple times about it in 2005 and 2006, and then hit it again for a third year. That the thing that was different that time is she found out on her own and confronted me about it. My first inclination was to lie about it because I'd been doing that really over the past couple years. But for whatever reason, I came clean and said, I've been gambling again. And I had a tremendous amount of debt behind the scenes at this point. I felt it would be likely that she would take our then 2-year-old daughter and leave me, and she had every right to do based on what I'd put the family through. But for whatever reason, she didn't. And it was the idea that I was going to lose my family that helped me reach the point where I needed to acknowledge that I had a problem I couldn't control on my own. And if I didn't stop, I was going to lose my family and access to my 2-year-old little girl. And something finally clicked. And that's when I reached out for professional help through the Problem Gambling Center here in Las Vegas. I connected to 12-step meetings that I still stay engaged with to this day. I started volunteering with the Nevada Council on Problem Gambling and some of their awareness initiatives. And today I'm proud to say that I actually work as a consultant to them, administering a lot of their programs in the community, talking to kids in the school, developing some new programs that provide outreach. And today I serve on the State Advisory Committee on Problem Gambling at the pleasure of the last 3 governors. And so I'm very proud of that fact in my recovery, that I'm able to reach out to others and hopefully provide them with information that will keep them from going down my path today. And so with that, I will shut up because I see that there are lots of questions, and you are welcome to type more, and you are welcome to ask about my personal story. My life is a very open book, but let's go through some of these. Let's see. Wonderful. Riley has, oh wait, let me go here. Yes, here from Hawaii. Lots of people here love to go to Vegas to gamble. It's like our second home. You forgot bingo. Oops, there's bingo. Not legal. Yes, Hawaiians love their gambling. We have a very special relationship. A lot of Hawaiians refer to Las Vegas as the 9th island. And despite gambling, the fact gambling is illegal in Hawaii, there are definitely people with gambling problems. I had the experience of attending Gamblers Anonymous meeting in Honolulu. There were about 25 people there, and over half of the people present said that either cockfighting or dogfighting were part of their gambling addiction. That's the only GA meeting I've ever been to anywhere where the majority of people, animal fighting was part of the gambling. But also there's lots of illegal sports betting going on. Thank you, Riley, for posting the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. We actually partnered with the Nevada Coalition on Suicide Prevention to produce some literature on suicide and problem gambling, and you can find that on our website and also get copies of that by reaching out. Here's a question from Mara. How do you make someone realize they have a problem? She's in total denial and gets very angry when you bring up the gambling addiction subject. She has filed for bankruptcy, lost her home before she started gambling, said it makes her feel good and forget about her problems. She has tons of boxes of free stuff, in quotes, from the casino that she earned that she doesn't need and cannot use, all in a house that she's renting and she doesn't even own, can't afford one anymore. How can you get her to realize she has a problem? It's a great question. It's a very painful question. I can feel your pain in asking that question. Obviously you can't make anyone realize that they have a problem. The best you can do as a friend is to reach out as a friend to express your own concern from a point of love for that person, which is often very difficult because some of the people that we most care about in our lives are also the ones that have the potential to hurt us the most. And when I was in my gambling addiction, I was hurting my wife and baby girl, even though she had no idea. And even for a long time, they both had no idea of the damage I was doing. But at some point that came out, and we tend to hurt the people we care about the most. But what you can do, you heard Denise Quirk talk about in the film that idea about reaching bottom. You hear the rock bottom. I want to dispel a little bit the mythology of the rock bottom idea, the idea that we have to let somebody reach the bottom on their own is not true. We can actually provide brief interventions ourselves that may bring them to a point of getting help more quickly than they might otherwise on their own. Because if you're still alive, there's always another rock bottom out there, right? And so we don't want to see people get to the point where they're contemplating suicide. Again, what you can do is let her know how her gambling behavior is affecting you, right? By kind of using I statements. And, when you go out gambling, it makes me feel this way. It takes the blame off of her. It just lets her know that that behavior is impacting you emotionally, that you care about her. And now that you've learned more about this resource, and you're probably better educated now than 99% of the general public, and that there are resources, you can say, hey, I participated in this educational webinar, and I didn't realize how serious it could be. Don't ever try to engage her in the act of gambling. That's definitely not going to work. Research shows that when people are pulled out of that environment, whether that's from a substance or from that behavior, that they will be more receptive. You mentioned she's very angry. That's very, very common. Again, people deflecting anger, becoming very, very defensive. So do not take that personally. So those are the things. I noticed you said you helped her out, paying her gas bill, and then you become very angry. And yes, so there's a little bit of that codependency, that enabling that goes on, right, where you're helping her out, but her money's going to gambling. And so although it's very, very difficult, it's important, not to bail problem gamblers out of their situation. That has to be a consequence that they recognize and they need to take responsibility for. But I would suggest to you, if there is Gammon On in your area as a meeting, to look up that resource, and because that's for friends and family members of others, and that can help you kind of disconnect from her illness and make sure that you're staying in a healthy spot. Because unless you're healthy, there aren't ways that you can truly help her. So that's kind of the best advice I can give. Great questions. Oh, brought this up to Ted. Okay, if you'd like to ask a question but remain anonymous, send it directly. Remember, loved hearing your personal history on gambling, and there were several coincidences with mine. Talk is very instructive. Do we have any other questions? You're welcome to unmute and speak directly if you're comfortable. You can also ask me, again, any specific questions about my story. I know I went through that very, very quickly, and I could spend a couple hours going through the sordid details of that and how awful it was, and how awfully I impacted other people in my life. But today, I'm grateful to be in a place that that's not happening anymore. I can honestly say today that I'm grateful for having gone through that experience and come out the other side alive, because I feel that I'm so much better connected to my community today, to people in my life in a way that I wasn't. I was a nice guy before I developed a gambling problem. I think, most people liked me, thought I was a good guy. But, when I went through that cycle, I was tough to be around for a lot of people, I think, even when I was trying to be nice. And I was definitely preoccupied with my gambling. I'm certainly not grateful for what I put other people through. Don't get me wrong, but I am grateful, again, for having had that experience, so I can share that with others today and let you know that while this is deadly serious business, that there is a lot of help out there, and it comes in a lot of different forms, because there really is no one size fits all approach. People need different types of resources and support. But one thing, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. I was going to let you know, Ted, that we do have a few actually anonymous questions.
Great.
So the first one is, what if you enjoy gambling and you come from a family of gamblers? You're okay to lose a lot, or excuse me, you lose a lot but can afford it. Would it still be considered an addiction or problem?
So if you remember, I covered that a little bit briefly. So you may be able to afford what you're losing, and it's important if you're affording more than, if you're gambling more than you can afford to lose, that's clearly an issue. So where it becomes a little bit of a gray area is, you're gambling a lot of money. You say you can afford to do it. Obviously, you're from a family of gamblers. I'm not sure exactly what that means, if it just means that the family likes to gamble or it's a problem maybe for some people. I would ask you to ask yourself, or if this is for another person, to say, is that gambling affecting my life negatively in other ways? Is it affecting my job performance if I'm still, if I'm still working? Is it affecting my productivity at work? Is it affecting my relationship with my family? Does my wife or husband, for example, tell me that they're upset with how much time I spend gambling at the casino? And what about that trip you've been promising me forever? If it's starting to affect your life negatively in other ways, then that's evidence that there's a problem present that needs to be addressed. So it's not just about the money, it's about how you're impacting other areas of your life. If everybody else in your family and your circle of friends is fine with it, it's not an impact on you financially, and you're doing fine. If there aren't those negative impacts, it doesn't matter that you're gambling every day, even, right? If you're staying within those limits. By the same token, if you're only going out once a year, but in that once a year, you're checking into the penthouse suite at the Bellagio, your family thinks you're out of town for a conference, you're spending 6 months of paychecks you really can't afford to lose, and then lying about that, there's all sorts of wrong going on, even though it's once a year, right? So I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Perfect, thank you. Our next question is, are there guidelines for an informal family intervention to be effective?
That's a great question. There are professional interventionists. There are, things you have to be careful with. I'm not a trained therapist myself, and so I wouldn't give you specific recommendations. There are certainly things you can do as an individual that I mentioned earlier, in terms of you letting the person know that their behavior is impacting you, so that they don't go through the process of justifying to themselves that, I'm only hurting myself because I went through this, right? I went through a long period, even when I started to build up debt in hidden credit cards. My rationalization to myself was, well, these are all in my name, so it's my money. It's not hurting anybody else. But the truth was, I had a family, right, that I was responsible to. This could be my daughter's college education fund. It could have been an early retirement for us, for example. So helping them realize that their behavior is not just affecting them, it's affecting other people who care about them. Being very careful to come to the individual from a standpoint of love. It can be really easy to come from a standpoint of anger if you've been personally affected, especially financially, by that other person's activities. And I promise you, if they are in that cycle already, they are angry at themselves, they are angry at the world, they feel guilty, they feel ashamed, they have often very, very confused as to why they can't stop, because often people have gambled recreationally for most of their lives, and all of a sudden something has happened to change that. And so for me, it was very difficult to acknowledge I needed help, because I thought, but it was fun for so long. How could I be in this spot? Surely I can learn to control this again and make it fun like it used to be. So I went through a couple strong years of denial, and denial, unfortunately, is a part of the usual process. Again, it's very important to protect yourselves, right? To get help yourselves and realize that you and your family, if it's your family that's being affected, can begin the recovery process regardless of whether that person with the gambling problem is ready to admit they have one on their own. Keeping to ultimatums rather than saying you're going to do something and then not, and backing off, kind of removing that consequences, something else to avoid as well. But I would get professional advice if you're going to do a family type intervention, and maybe have somebody who is more familiar with that technique therapeutically to engage in that process if you're going to do it, rather than just trying it on your own because you've seen it on TV or something like that. What else?
Perfect, thank you. Our next question is, Ted, you mentioned that if complete abstinence was not possible, sometimes controlled, limited gambling could be considered. But if problem gambling is nearly indistinguishable from substance abuse, how does that affect relapse? For example, addicts must almost always fully abstain.
So it's a great question, and I had a little cognitive dissonance when I first, I'm a research scientist by profession, so I need to respect the research data that's out there. But also I was aware of my own experience, which was once it became a problem, I can look back and see that accelerate through the course of time, and then look at myself and see I tried so many times to stop on my own. I tried so many times. I promised so many people, including myself, that I was going to stop for various reasons, and really believed that I was going to be able to do it. And I wasn't. And that's probably your more typical in any type of addictive disorder story. But I mentioned that research that's out there, and this is true of both substances and gambling, that people who meet the diagnostic criteria for an addictive disorder, about a third of them find a way to recover on their own, some of them even with controlled behavior, again, without formal intervention of a therapist or a 12-step group. There's a lot of research that's being done right now into resilience. What makes those people more resilient to not having to reach out to those resources? And there is some evidence for harm reduction being successful for some people. Now, we can have that argument about, did they transition into that full-blown addictive disorder? Maybe if they're at the lower end of, that the mild number of criteria, or not quite there, there's a lot of suggestion that people are kind of fluid, moving between recreational gambling and then this problematic gambling, but not quite into that disordered category, right? And so I think there's a lot of room for keeping our minds open. And even in the situation for people like myself, who obviously need that significant additional intervention, and I've made up my mind that I'm not going to, I've chosen not to gamble again in my life. I need to think about that one day at a time. In some cases, if I think project too far out into the future, I've made that decision because I've known people, including one of my counselors, quite honestly, who had 37 years of abstinence and made the decision to go back out and start betting. He thought, okay, I'm a trained counselor. I can start betting on sports again. And in pretty short order, re-devastated his life. And I believe he's still alive. I'm not certain, but he was someone who was very important in my personal recovery. I took that very seriously. And that said to me, one of the little bits of wisdom I've heard in some 12-step meetings is, we're all different lengths of time away from our last bet, but we're all the same distance away from our next potential bet. And so regardless of the amount I have in my recovery, which is about 13 and a half years now, for me, I've decided I can't gamble again. And there are plenty of other things to keep me occupied, even living in Las Vegas today. So I know that's a lot of food for thought, and maybe I didn't completely answer your question, but go out there and seek out all of these things, because all of these different modalities may work for different people.
Thank you, Ted. We do have another question, but as folks start to log off, I wonder if you can post your contact information in the chat, because there may be people who want to reach out.
Absolutely.
And as you are doing that, thank you so much. Our next question is, oftentimes those who are addicted to substances have a partner who also uses and/or is addicted themselves. How often do you see this kind of relationship where both partners are problem gamblers and continue to fuel each other's addictions?
I'd say in my personal experience, it's fairly common to hear this story within the recovery community. Sometimes, hopefully it's a situation where both individuals have gotten into recovery. Often it's not the same addictive disorder. I know plenty of people who had gambling problems who were in relationships with someone with some type of substance use disorder, whether it was some type of drug or alcohol. And even though it wasn't the same addictive disorder, they were obviously kind of co-enabling. It's like, you don't ask me or confront me about mine, and I won't confront you about yours, right? And so, it's wonderful when the recovery process happens at the same time for both people, but often it doesn't. And so that person who's getting help for themselves also has to learn how to get help as somebody who's affected by somebody else's disorder, right? If they want to try to stay in that relationship and make it work, but it's more common if the other person isn't ready to get help for that relationship to dissolve. One of the other, words of wisdom I've heard within 12-step meetings is, my sponsor told me once, says, Ted, this program saves a lot of marriages and it breaks up a lot of marriages, because as people get healthier in their own skin and in their own program, sometimes they realized that relationship was their major trigger for wanting to escape from pain, that it's an unhealthy relationship that was one of the main risk factors for them developing whatever that addictive disorder is. So again, it's very common. It's not uncommon to see people who are in recovery or trying to make it work with one person in. That usually doesn't work for very long, but I would say very, very common.
Great, thank you so much. I don't see any other questions in the chat other than many thanks to you, Ted, for your amazing presentation and sharing your story. This was such an incredible conversation and information to share. So thank you so much. And
well,
you can
I
see those.
Want to express thanks to AARP for hosting this. And I've already put a little bug in Riley's ear, but and you may see me again on one of these, but in case you don't, one thing I didn't talk about that I hope to in the future is gaming disorder. And this involves digital gaming. And you might be surprised to learn that one of the fastest growing demographics for gaming, digital gaming use is seniors, people who are 50 plus, especially among women. A lot of these are smartphone apps, things like Candy Crush, other types of games, but games you can do lots of transactions with. And there's a ton of overlap between gambling and gaming, and it's affecting some of the same parts of the brain. So I hope to do another one in the future on that subject.
I think that is definitely in our future. I don't think I'm addicted to Candy Crush, but there's definitely some time lost there. So Ted, thank you so much, and thank you for sticking around. We definitely went over our hour, but again, such a great conversation, and I'm so happy everyone got their questions answered. We will be sending out those resources tomorrow, so look for our email. If you need anything before then, please get in touch with us at AARP. Please get in touch with Ted. He did list his email in our chat, so feel free to get that before you log off. Our email address and contact information at AARP Nevada is AARPNV, like Nevada, at aarp.org. Very unique, but straightforward, memorable. So again, thank you all so much for being here. Ted, we so appreciate you, and we look forward to more presentations in the future. And we will get this recording up on our YouTube page and possibly our website. So if you missed anything or came in late, you'll be able to see the whole presentation. And with that, take care, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.